All right, good morning, Chairperson, Member Garrett, staff, and guests. The lobby is open and recording has begun.
Thank you, Dustin. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Executive Management Team meeting for Wednesday, April 14th, 2022. Excuse me. Our first item is approval of the minutes from our February 9th meeting. Motion to approve.
I move approval of the February 9th EMT meeting minutes.
Great. I'll second, and those are approved. Our first report out today is from our CFO, Jim Morgan, for an update on the Cannabis Central Reporting System, CCRS. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairperson, Board Member Garrett. It's been a little while since I've updated you on the progress of the CCRS project. Most of the work at this point, all of the work at this point continues to happen behind the scenes, and this phase of the work will mostly benefit internal users of the system. The system remains stable. In January, I believe I reported we had an update of the system, a stabilizing update, and the system continues to perform as expected. We are aware of issues and challenges and suggested changes and requested changes to the system internally and externally, and we're evaluating those. I'll get to that in just a moment. As for our progress on wrapping up phase one, the set of the highest priority reports are set to be put into production next week. The team ran into some challenges as more and more data was entered into the system. They discovered some performance issues on how those reports were constructed, how the technology for running those reports. So they had some challenges to work through that they have worked through. So they'll be usable to our enforcement staff and others who need to avail themselves of those reports. Not a huge setback that reports are only becoming available now, because as we've been developing reports, that's also the time where the licensees have been entering data. Before we went live in December, there was no data whatsoever in the system. So having reports on the day that we went live really wouldn't have provided much benefit. So we are looking forward to having those reports out. The team is nearing completion on scoping, their scoping effort for phase two, and the project manager will be presenting that scope to me and the business owners, the enforcement director and IT director next week for us to evaluate that and bring to the steering committee for approval. Parts of that will certainly affect the submissions that we get from licensees. And once we have the scope fully fleshed out, we'll be able to establish the calendar and also establish our communications efforts for making sure that they're well aware of what changes there will be that impact them. So we'll give licensees as much notice and as much detail and communication as possible so that they can make that transition when the time comes. One specific piece that is part of that scope is the improvements that we promised to the manifest process, and I'm told that the analysts on the team have worked through the proposed solution and are comfortable that they will be able to implement that solution as it was recommended and designed by our folks, and also pointed out by some industry folks. So that's good news that it appears to be a solution is workable, and that will be part of that scope. That will be a separate piece to it. It's a separate piece right now from the regular reporting into the system. It has its own process, so that will likely changes to that system will likely be separate from the other changes to the standard upload. So we'll work that into the schedule and be able to report back more next time. As far as adoption of the system, at this point, a little bit over 80%, I think about 83% of licensees have logged into the system. And the other 17% are the focus of the enforcement division. We are aware that some of the remainder are not actually doing business right now. So that's why they haven't logged in or are uploading to the system. So we'll be sorting through that. Enforcement will be beginning to take an enforcement posture now for licensees that they have contacted already to make an education and outreach to make sure they're aware of the system. If after they've been contacted and informed of the process and what's expected, if they still haven't begun using the system, then appropriate enforcement steps will follow. Another number that we are tracking that will also be an enforcement focus is, at this point, while 83% or so of licensees have accessed the system, about 78% are actively uploading data into the system. So we're really at a basic 80-20 rule where we're going to, I would anticipate a fair amount of effort to reach 100%, but that's the focus now. On the plus side, the system is being used. It's working as designed, and we'll take advantage of the ones that are of the data from the ones that are using the system, and then focus on full adoption.
Okay.
So,
any questions, Member Garrett? So a couple of quick questions. One, when we do get to that point, maybe whatever that next hurdle is on running those reports, I'd just be curious to sit down with somebody who runs those and see what the tool does for us. I've never had the chance to really look over somebody's shoulder. That would be interesting to me. Are we still getting inquiries from retailers saying, or licensees saying, help here, I'm having a problem, or that remaining, the 78% are doing it and it's working? And I guess we have a small delta there between 78 and 83% who have access but aren't actively uploading. But yeah, what's sort of the helpline traffic like, Jim?
I can't say for sure that we're not getting inquiries on the helpline, but it's become it's minimized to the point where it's not something that's being reported out to me as a key indicator of how we're doing.
Okay. All right. That's good. I would assume we'd hear from people if there were a lot of problems, and they've not been shy. So, and I know there's more to come. So, okay, good. We'll look forward to the next report, and do just let me know whenever you think it would be a good time to be able to sit down with somebody and get a little road test of the system. That'd be interesting.
We'll do. We'll make sure that the reports are functional and operational, and that staff get used to them and understand what they do for them, and then we'll certainly connect you with some users there.
Great, cool. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is a update on the Cannabis Retail Safety Forum. We did spend a fair amount of time this morning at the board meeting on that. I don't know that we have a lot new between then and now. I did want to, Rick, why don't we, since it's on the agenda here, if you'd like to just take a minute now to talk about some of the other efforts that are going on, maybe that would be good.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, board member Ollie Garrett, and staff. We did get a good understanding today of what we've been doing with respect to armed robberies in the forum that was held yesterday, where we invited licensees to come and hear from several, and I won't get into it, but there were 4 or 5 different local law enforcement, King County, Bellevue, Pierce County, Tacoma, Olympia, who shared best practices. And unfortunately, we didn't have as many licensees present as we would like. But I think the only thing I would share from that, as was discussed this morning, we do have Chandra and Jim working on potentially a security firm or company that could provide assistance to us with training for our licensees, and maybe more importantly, assessments that can be done for those businesses to help them know how they can be more secure. I think the idea of what we know that maybe we didn't share today is the rash of many of these armed robberies are occurring in King County, Pierce County, Tacoma, Seattle specifically. That might be an area where we would begin. The idea would be, once we know what we can do with respect to hiring someone to assist us, work very closely with local law enforcement. One thing I hadn't shared was that Mayor Woodards had reached out to Mayor of Tacoma last week, like many communities, concerned about what they could do to help. Immediately, she then spoke with her new police chief, and the idea is for us to work coordinated with the city of Tacoma and Pierce County, for example, very soon to hold, whether that's a face-to-face meeting or a virtual meeting with our licensees, with local law enforcement, to talk about ways and best practices that we can use to assist them right now. And then also bring that other piece that Jim's spoke about today, which is there are cashless systems out there that are available for our licensees to use. And I'll just reiterate what you said, Jim, which is what we've learned. There appears to be a lack of understanding or education around the cost, not only that, but that they're available for us to use. In one of the meetings that we had recently with, and I'll just dive off to another meeting that we had with Department of Financial Institutions, our state credit unions and state banks. We learned, and we had 2 vendors specifically there, that those systems are available, and that in fact, some of them, like Posibet, are being used by a large number of our licensees. So I think a meeting in the community, beginning with King or Pierce, if that's where we go, which kind of makes sense. The first half would be about security around the licensed premises. The second half would be maybe educating our licensees about those cashless systems that are out there and available for use. In the response we heard on the 28th, when the board hosted the forum with licensees, there was a real concern that these are high transaction fees. Some of the information we've learned in the last couple of weeks, it's more like what you might pay to use a debit or credit card. And so I think, as you've stated and the board has stated, Chair Postman, we need to do a better job of educating our licensees to what's available for them to use. And then you even went further to state, because many of our licensees are looking for some incentive, some kind of tax deferral, something that would help them pay for these systems. And you rightfully said that's something that's going to be difficult to do without legislative approval or authority or authorization as far as budget. But that at least for now we'll use our own resources to see what we can do to provide a security firm or company to help us with this. But I think as we've said throughout this process, and we learned yesterday in the meeting with local law enforcement, there's a lot of discussion going on with local law enforcement and our licensees that people may not be aware of, where those local law enforcement authorities are sitting down with licensees to help them understand how they can be more secure. And so those discussions can continue to go on. There was the whole discussion on March 29th, the first forum the board held with licensees, where we had legislators present. You may remember Senator Kaiser was there, Senator Nobles was there, Representative Chambers was there, the treasurer was there, where we began to talk with licensees about the problems that they have. And the whole issue of safe banking and the Safe Banking Act came up, as you might recall. Michael Correa with NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association, who lobbies for the Safe Banking Act, shared what we've heard from others in the state, that the US Senate, specifically our 2 US senators, need to be contacted and communicated with, because obviously the problems that we're having with the Safe Banking Act moving is in the US Senate. So immediately after that meeting, David and I put meetings together. We had a meeting last week with Senator Murray's staff, which went very well. We're continuing efforts to get a meeting with Senator Cantwell to discuss this issue. It's not going to solve everything, but right now, some of the problems they're having with the Safe Banking Act have to do with other proposals like the MORE Act, and they may not want to deal with that Safe Banking Act before they deal with the others. And we're obviously in a situation with the urgency of the issue that we need to press our US senators to do something. We've also had discussions, as the chairman knows, with the governor's office to begin to work with our governor and other elected officials. It's very likely that we'll get approval for a letter that will go from state elected officials, including our governor, attorney general, lieutenant governor, our treasurer, to our congressional delegation and others, stressing upon them the importance of getting the Safe Banking Act passed. If I probably missed a meeting or two, that was 2 weeks and a day ago. So I just want to stress, as you have board members, there's a lot this agency is doing to try to deal with this issue. Discussions, as you heard earlier, with labor and industries about worker safety. In the meeting we had on the 29th, we heard from licensees and others, and Senator Kaiser, concerns about, what about worker safety? Well, what about our own staff safety as far as our officers that are out there in these establishments? So I think we're doing just about everything we possibly can to try to do everything we can, really more importantly, to communicate with our licensees the things that they can do now. And so we'll continue those efforts in the next week, and hopefully we'll have more to share. But we continue to work with our congressional delegation to try to get them to understand the importance of moving on forward with the Safe Banking Act. But I just really want to commend the board for your diligence around working on this issue and getting meetings together, and then specifically our staff that's doing all of the hard work and trying to make sure with other state agencies, with other elected officials, that we have to do everything we can to try to deal with this issue of all these armed robberies around the state. And I know I've talked too long, so I'll stop there unless there's questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, one of the things I've been heartened by is everybody we've reached out to has been willing to engage, whether that's internally within the administration, with law enforcement, the retailers and licensees themselves. After the roundtable, we did hear from some local governments and police departments that told us about things they had been doing and offers to help others. We had a good turnout from the law enforcement side yesterday. A little hard, I think, to do that, in that setting. So we're going to do more. We're going to find some other ways. But, Department of Financial Institutions, they're just really sharpening their pencils, if you will, to look at whatever could be done to help. I think, you're absolutely right. Part of this is just letting people know what is out there. And as our CFO has said, he had gotten questions early on, when 2 years ago or perhaps more, is this allowed or is that allowed? We also need to be really clear about that. What can you do? And there's a lot of room there to do. I got a note this morning while the board meeting was still going on about, what we might be able to do to go to the legislature related to cashless systems. And, one of the hurdles we'll keep running up against in that system is that you very quickly come up against the federal issue. There's only so much the state can do. The state chartered banks have a little more leeway to accept, the money and things of that sort, but they don't run credit card systems like Visa, and they will come with a fee. So it's going to be some kind of transition here. We all hope there is action at the federal level in the next couple of years at the latest to move us not just on this banking issue, but perhaps national legalization. And And so whatever we're doing now doesn't have to be the permanent end all system for transactions. But you know, one of our licensees said at that roundtable, or asked us, you know, asked the board, please don't sit there till you come up with a perfect answer. We need the imperfect, but we need it now. We need every little piece we can. And I think that is how we're thinking about this, which is understanding, I think, Rick, you said, that the banking issue isn't going to be the one thing that fixes it all. No one thing will fix it all, right? So that's why we're trying to go at every little piece we can. And as I said this morning, I think we're going to need to, incentivize every player in this system, including ourselves. What's our incentive? How do we do this? How do we get out there and help? What funding do we have to provide training or consultation or whatever it is? What more do we need to do? What would we urge licensees to do? DFI, the government, whatever it is. And we know we have engagement from, as you said, the treasurer, legislators, key legislators who want to look at what can they do come January. But that's, they convene in January, they adjourn probably in May of next year. So we can't just sit and wait. So it is really about not waiting for the perfect, to just keep grabbing what we can and working on it. And there's no one thing. So, I guess the customers have to be incentivized. The customers have to buy into this in a literal way. If you're a customer and you got to understand that a safe industry is helped by a cashless system. So yeah, downloading an app or whatever it is might take one extra step than what you have to do today, but it's good for your bud tender, it's good for your licensee, it's good for everyone. So we're all going to just have to, I think, join that fight together and see what we can do to keep this, completely legal and legitimate industry safe for everybody, and not let it get, marked by this violent crime. It's just terrible. The human life loss is still traumatic, obviously. So, okay. With that, I think we'll move on to our next item, which is a legislative update with Chris Thompson, our legislative director.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Board
Sure.
Member Garrett. Good to be with you. I'll give you a quick rundown on measures the legislature approved this short session, starting with a few cannabis items. And first of all, the agency request bill on standards for cannabis testing labs. That measure jointly requested by this agency and the Department of Agriculture was approved by the legislature. Lopsided margins. We're really happy to see the team effort there with a number of agencies and positive stakeholder support for that as well. The bill creates a interagency coordination team, and LCB, along with DOH, will serve on that with the Department of Agriculture, which will be the lead agency. And that group will put together the substantive standards for quality process at cannabis testing labs. Those standards will eventually be reflected in rules adopted by the Department of Agriculture, and the new program envisions retaining a role at the Department of Ecology as well. So all four of those agencies, Ecology, Health, Agriculture, and LCB, were together in a really strong partnership this session to get that bill successfully across the finish line and signed by the governor. So we're very happy about that. Next item is second substitute House Bill 1210, which changes the word marijuana to the word cannabis throughout the RCWs, and includes, at our agency's request, direction for the agency to make the same change in our regulations in the Washington Administrative Code. So that directive included in the bill does facilitate an expedited process for us in rule. Third, engrossed second substitute Senate Bill 5796 by Senator Saldana. This reorganizes, restructures the statute talking about intended uses of cannabis revenues. So where those dollars would go, how much to what agency, for what purpose, and so forth. There aren't really many significant substantive changes as they did that. They did some restructuring. They also included a study requirement from JLARC to look at this statute, report back by the end of 2023. With, an examination of the current statute, the expenditure history, and make any potential recommendations for options to improve the transparency and accountability regarding the use of these revenues. There was in this bill, however, I'll note substantive change that relates to social equity. I'll come back to that in just a minute when I talk about the budget. Next item, House Bill 1827 did not actually pass, but was addressed through the budget. So this is a proposal from Governor Inslee as an executive request effort to engage in a concerted community reinvestment effort. The bill didn't pass, but the budget included $200 million for this program at this point. And the purpose of these funds is to address disproportionate impacts from the war on drugs. There are 4 broad categories of activity these funds are intended to support. Those are economic development, legal assistance, violence prevention and intervention services, and reentry services for formerly incarcerated people. So also in the budget, there was legislation on social equity, which also did not pass, but the budget addresses a couple of topics related to social equity that I'll mention. One is that the grant funding that's been already approved in previous legislative cycles, and this was done through the bill I mentioned a minute ago. The amount was increased almost double, from about 1.6 million annually to 3 million annually for those grants for social equity applicants. There was also a fairly modest increase in funding for another program in the Department of Commerce to develop a roster of mentors that could be available to provide technical assistance to the social equity applicants. And then also in the budget related to social equity, the LCB was granted $500,000 to contract with a third party to provide a service for our agency in implementing the program, specifically prioritizing social equity applicants. So that was included in the budget. A couple of other budget items I'll mention briefly. The system modernization project was fully funded in the budget. So I imagine Jim and his team and the committee is very happy about that, among other folks. There's also, I mentioned at the top, the request legislation on cannabis testing labs. I didn't mention our agency and others had funding needs tied to implementation of that, and our funding needs were fully addressed in the budget as well. So we're very happy about that. And then last item, there was $290,000 included in the budget for academy training for 5 listed limited authority law enforcement agencies. So that includes us, state parks, DNR, a couple of other agencies as well. So we were also pleased to see that. So last item here, I'll mention a couple of bills on alcohol that made it through the process. One is third substitute House Bill 1359 by Representative Monica Stonier. This is a measure that reduces by half the license or license renewal fee for a long list of liquor licensees. Not everybody, some license types were not really impacted by COVID restrictions, but many were. And so there's a list of 19 different license types that'll have through the end of next year the opportunity to obtain for the first time or renew a license at half the usual fee amount. And then last, Senate Bill 5940 by Senator King allows our liquor manufacturers, distillers, wineries, breweries to provide under contract bottling and packaging services to other licensees, which was not previously authorized. So those were the two alcohol related measures that made it through, and that's my report.
Any questions, Member Garrett? Chris, I got one on the governor's reinvestment fund that you said was in the budget, but we don't have the legislation. Then without a bill, how do they go about, getting that money out into those areas you talked about, economic development, legal assistance, et cetera? Do we know that yet?
Well, I don't think we know a lot of details yet, but the money was sent over to OFM to make available for these efforts through the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Commerce got $1 million in the budget for developing plans for that program and that process. It sounds to me like the thought or the plan is to utilize existing programs currently until that plan comes together. There's some requirements around that planning process that Commerce will address as they put together a longer term proposed approach for this. But I think my sense is that it will be possible to begin to move forward with this program with what is currently available rather than having to wait until a longer is put together by Commerce.
Member Garrett?
I couldn't tell if the hand was up or not. So and I'm trying to understand the difference between the funds being approved in the budget, but the bill not passing. Was it different language in the bill for use of those funds or something that made it different than the actual being in the budget and the areas you named as to where the funding was going to go?
Well, the budget bill is a little bit less detailed than the separate legislation, but the broad outlines are the same. So the bill and the budget sections that provided funds talk about the same types of purposes, for example. The budget is not permanent law. So this is a supplemental year. It's in effect until June 30 of next year. So what this does is it potentially enables the program to get started in the meantime. And then I assume, this is just speculation on my part, but I assume there will be a desire to come back to legislation and approve a more permanent statutory structure for this. That isn't necessarily required. It could be that this program becomes ongoing only through the budget. I don't know what the perspective is on that at the Department of Commerce or even the governor's office, but it could go either way.
Okay, you just helped me clear up the difference between a bill and the budget. I guess that's what I was trying to, but
Okay.
Yeah,
and Chris, the bill would have just laid out more of the programmatic side of this. in detail, which I know they can do some of that. But so one of the things I wonder, and I know this is not a social equity and cannabis licensing bill, but, particularly the piece of economic development, part of that, is there any discussion or opportunity for social equity license applicants to get some assistance through this program if they are successful in getting a license?
I really can't answer. That's a question for Department of Commerce, but I will say that there is a requirement for Department of Commerce to do certain forms of consultation. So one opportunity that Board Member Garrett will have as a member of the Social Equity and Cannabis Task Force is to, share recommendations on that. So the task force, Social Equity and Cannabis Task Force, is one of the entities listed as a place that Commerce needs to go to do some consultation in developing their larger plan. There are the Office of Equity is another, and community organizations are also to be consulted. But what I've heard from a colleague over at Department of Commerce just recently is that so far what they're hearing from directions like the task force is an interest in economic development, especially maybe not as much all four categories, but that was certainly one that has come up as they understand the interest at the task force as a focus here. So I would think economic development, social equity businesses, that might be a fit, but it's just me speculating here.
Right.
It's Commerce and perhaps to some degree OFM's, decision to make.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't want to suggest we're lobbying Member Garrett right now to help make that happen.
Far from it. Wouldn't
But
dream
I
of.
do think, there's some real natural connections, I think, between that program and what we're trying to achieve with licensing work as well. But there's other, as you said, the Department of Commerce has other funds also specifically for the mentoring program and others related to licensing. And I think, so anyhow.
That's true. But I'd say, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was just going to underscore and support your thought. Both of those programs, the Social Equity Program and the Community Reinvestment Program, are in significant part motivated by, the same set of conditions and history that we've talked about so much, the disproportionate impact from enforcing drug prohibitions in communities across this state and this nation. So
Yep.
That's certainly a common tie, very persuasive one, I would say.
Okay, good. Well, I'd be interested to learn more about that. Okay, thank you. Anything more to add? No? Okay, great. Thank you. See you next
Thank you.
time. We will move to licensing with Licensing Director Becky Smith. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Let me just get started. I'm going to go ahead and just kick it off with social equity. It sounds like a perfect place to start. And I'm just going to give a really brief update that we've done a lot of work with our IT department and Department of Revenue. So we developed a draft system that for the requirements for the abilities to begin accepting applications. So it's important that folks understand it's not just about developing a licensing process, but it's also about connecting with our partners. So we have them on board. That I thank the IT team for working with my staff and business licensing services. I think we're going to be ready to go. I know we're going to be ready to go this fall. So I just wanted to share that. And then some other exciting news is that we have posted for our case manager for social equity. So as you recall, the task force, that was one of the recommendations, is to hire a social equity case manager. And so we were able to develop the position, and the recruitment began on April 5th. So that application went over to the task force as well as the Commission on African American Affairs. We wanted to make sure that we hit this very widespread application process. We also had, we're also putting our other application there for our senior licensing investigator as well that will help to process these applications. It's important to not just myself, but of course the agency, for us to make sure we have those folks in place when we start to do education and training so they can meet the people that they're going to be working with. And then, oh, go ahead.
Can I ask you a question about, go back to the case manager? Can you just give us an example of what that person would do? How will that work once we are taking applications?
Yeah, so actually before we start, they'll be building and monitoring like relationships with the community members, the social equity applicants, licensees, the task force, local governments, going out there with stakeholders and doing education about what the program's about. They're also going to be operating as what I consider to be like an ombudsman. So working with the licensing investigator. So prior to application and then after the application process. So after they're licensed, that if they need to, or they feel like they need to check in with somebody, that person will also be checking in with these folks to make sure that how are things going, that how is their relationship with, our enforcement partners, our consultants, but also with other agencies. So if they have questions about how to, how to work with small business affairs, for instance, that this person will help to connect those dots.
That's great. Yeah, that'll be good. Okay.
So, and then one last thing is I also wanted to share with you that that board member Garrett and I attended as a Seattle council meeting on April 6th. We provided information on social equity program and we answered their questions that were posed to us. I thought the meeting went very well and it was well attended. It's good to be getting some of that information out there again. And then, so that's my updates for social equity. We do have a lot of work going on still that behind the scenes. And I should say that, that Chris mentioned about the third-party vendor, that we are just about done with that. We're doing the last review on the contract, and then that should be ready to be released sometime here at the end of April.
Let me, another question, which I know we've talked about before, but just to remind me, if not anybody else. So we approved the 102 this morning. I think the 103 is scheduled for early June. If that all happens as we think, and I'm going to assume the board will approve it for the sake of discussion here, how fast will we start to accept applications after that? When do you think the first ones come?
So I think that will be in September.
Okay.
So it will be, yeah, it's important to know that we have to, that getting that RFP out for the third-party vendor, but also providing some education to those folks as well, that we want them hired and ready to go when we begin accepting applications. We want to do some education. So we want to do some education and training on how do you apply, who do you need to, what systems do you need to go to as far as other state agencies? And then what will that mean once you apply?
Yeah.
How many times can you apply? So we'll be going out with Kathy Hoffman and her rules group as well. So folks understand from the very beginning, that what rules apply, what they need to have prepared and ready to go when the window opens.
Including, I'm sure, that how do you find a place where you can open one of these stores?
Right, and the rules have changed, that in the rules that they won't, that you won't be required to have a location in order to apply, which is a huge change for licensing and for our license applicants as well. So just to know that they won't have to worry about how to find a location, that'll come after they've already applied, they receive, one of those 40 licenses and maybe more by the time we actually get to this open window. But that won't have to be something initially that they start to look for. But you're right. How do you sort of maneuver that,
right,
that piece of, working with a realtor or working with somebody, working with all of our communities. So, you know, it's
And
just there's a
license,
lot.
I mean, it's an important switch, but also, I mean, the license is not a guarantee that you have a place to open.
Correct.
I mean,
That's correct.
you know, yeah. Member Garrett?
I think you just make the statement I was going to make, but it took away in the, what happened in the first go around, that they had to be locked into a lease and not knowing whether or not they were going to get in. And when they didn't get in, they were stuck with a lease that they've signed. So this kind of, is that going to take all of that away, Becky, or just a
It is.
portion of
So
it?
just let me correct you that we never required anybody to have a lease. We did require them to have an address in which that they would operate if they were able to get a license or be able to process their application. But that will get rid of that, Ollie, that they won't have to have a location, and there's no time limit. That's the other thing right now, that in the rules there's no time limit to getting licensed. So it's not like everybody has to run for and the it's gone from being to the city level in our rules to really opening it up to the whole county. So then they get to move within that King County. So 8 people could go into the city of Seattle or none at all. That it will depend on the location. And that was good information for the city of Seattle to hear as well. That, that people, I think that folks need to start thinking about how they're permitting in those cities and jurisdictions.
Right. Yeah, that meeting was great with the city and helping them while they're putting their own program together. We didn't know we were going to have to sit through the entire council meetings until they got to us, but back to that statement of not having to have a lease, because that was a lot of what we were hearing as what the harm was. So was that a miscommunication, or are we saying the same thing when we say they had to have an address? That for them, that means they had to go out and find a location and have something permanent in place, that this was going to be the location. Because that's what I used to hear a lot from people. They had to have a lease and they were locked into lease. So how did that get?
I can't tell you how it happened, Ollie. I can just tell you that that wasn't the case. It wasn't the case that no one had to have a locked-in lease. They had to show that they had, because we had landlords at the time that provided 3 or 4 people with that if they were to receive a license, they could, or that would be one of the applications processed, then they could locate in this building. So, but if the address made a big difference for folks made that jumped to that assumption that they had to have a lease. But yeah, we've heard that over the years many times.
Right.
For sure.
Yep.
So again, it's so important for us to go out there and do a lot of education, educate, and answer questions for folks. So on to other items, customer service and liquor applications. I will tell you, we're back up to pre-pandemic numbers. That they're coming in hot and heavy, especially special occasion licenses. As you know, people are wanting to get out and that's a positive thing. That we're still in the process of hiring a lot of new folks, and so it's not as quick of a process as we'd like it to be. But certainly, that in the next few months we should probably get our feet under us and be able to continue to process quickly as well. And then a couple of reminders for anybody that has a license, has a permit, a nonprofit arts and a wine association, that those renewals are coming due. Our annual renewals are due on June 30th. And so folks will start to receive those letters. What's really cool this year is that the last 2 years, customer service and IT and our third-party vendor have worked really hard on making that automatic instead of having to reach out to each individual, permit holder and make sure that we have the correct address. So we're excited about that process because this year it's less of a manual process. So that's really good news.
Great.
And then for cannabis, I do want to let you know that we had a reach out from Okanagan County, which again is really positive for us to start hearing from counties. They were asking us, they've recently put a moratorium on all new producers and expansions, and they're currently looking at all of the producers in their county. They wanted to make sure that their list matched our list. And then for those folks who aren't operating with a license, they're going to go in and take action. So we've sent their list over. We worked with them. We pulled in our enforcement side of the shop, and it's, you know, that again, it's, I think that's a positive move on their part and on ours to get rid of some of these illicit grows. And then one other, oh, go ahead.
Was
I
the,
was, oh.
no, go ahead. Remember, Gary.
I was going to ask the question, and it's not about the grows, but once you mentioned the, have we had any progress or heard from any of the ones that had the bans and stuff for retailers? Has anyone had a change of heart?
No.
No, not any of them. Okay.
No, we did in the very beginning when we began reaching out. Clark County certainly changed, and that was really positive. But we haven't heard from any the other folks.
Okay.
In Okanagan, was it the suggestion that there were processors or producers who claimed they were licensed? Well, actually, don't get
Yes.
into investing what,
Okay.
because who knows what'll come to us. But okay, curious. I did get that email from Okanagan, so I saw the initial inquiry, but it didn't dawn on me until you just said that. So, but we'll let that one go. Okay. Anything else?
And then one other positive thing that comes to cannabis is that we finally licensed our second research license. That it's taken a long time because this is a huge process to get a research license, because it's not just us that reviews the license application itself, it's another third-party entity. So we finally have our second research license, and so again, that's really positive news on our part as well. And then for our, you know, that we always try to look at how to better our process. And again, I would, you know, hats off to my staff that have worked with our packaging folks, our processors, that they, you know, they had reached out to us and said the most common request was from our licensees was that the form, there was multiple forms to fill out. So we worked a lot like we did with our design thinking, specifically with our processors to say, how can we make this process easier for you? And so we designed a one-pager. They reviewed it, gave their thumbs up, and now it's just a one-pager that they have to fill out instead of multiple applications.
Great. Good.
And I think that's it for me.
Okay. Great report. Thank you. You guys are doing a lot of heavy lifting, you and your team there. So let us know if there's anything we can do to help.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We will move to enforcement and education from Director Chandra Brady. Good afternoon, Director.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for inviting me here to share the great work of our Enforcement Education Division with you. I'm really excited because I'm sharing new slides with you today. I'm going to be making some decisions moving forward to consolidate and adjust those slides. So I'm welcoming input even more than normal.
Great.
I will need a little bit of grace on my 10 minutes, but I've already greased the skids with the timekeeper just a little bit. I'm using some of the rollover minutes that I have in the bank. But if my camera should turn off and I should mute, then you'll know Dustin, the timekeeper changed his mind.
I didn't know we could bank that time, but please take all the time you need.
Thank you.
I want to see the new slides, so.
I'm excited. Dustin, now that I've said that, could you please drive for me? All right, so I start with just for a frame of reference, I'll start with just the number of licenses that we currently have. And when we look at how many employees we have and how many officers we have and then how many positions we have filled, we're looking at well over 250 licensees per officer that we have, just for a frame of reference as we start this conversation. Next slide. When we look at our complaint data, and this slide does not include COVID complaints, and this is a monthly glance at complaints. So January, February, March being in the darkest blue, you can see that our non-COVID complaint numbers are starting to rise pretty consistently, at least in liquor and cannabis industries. As we look at complaints as a whole across the industries, the number of complaints we have and the number of them that are COVID related, you'll see that number is decreasing, which is very nice. I'm going to keep COVID on here for one more quarter because I want to see this all at 0% as we walk out of this phase. But I am going to add a column of public safety here so we can see the number of our complaints that are related to public safety moving forward in this quarterly glance. And the next slide is just a visual look at this, and you can see the representation in the dark blue column there in March. Instead of a quarterly glance, it's a monthly glance, and you can see that dark blue column really decreasing as we go forward month to month in this post-COVID era. When we look at education and violations, you can see over on the right, you can see a year-to-date, year-at-a-glance look for education contacts. And one of the things that I noted when I looked at this data is if we look at the black column with 6,748 education contacts for 2022, we're on target to be at about 27,000 education contacts at the end of the year. If we move over to violation data, for instance, in the left column, and look at that black column for 249 AVNs in the first quarter of the year, that's 3.7% of our educational contacts. When you really get down to our contacts, how much we're out in the industry, making positive contacts with people, the AVNs represent 3.7% of those contacts we had in the first quarter, which is really positive, and it's a good number to be reporting.
Can I ask you a question about these slides here?
Yeah.
On the previous one, on the education contacts, that 6,748 you said is projected year end to be about 27,000. So be pretty high. If we move to the violation data side, if you look at AVNs, we've got 249 so far this year, and then the 2020 though total was 319 for 12 months
in 2020.
So we're on par to go to have a whole lot more AVNs in 2022 than we did in 2020.
Yeah, so the difference is our businesses are open.
Oh yes, right, of course. Okay.
Yeah, that will be in a little bit of a different time, and we'll walk through some of the reasons for. One of the things that when I start to get some good data like this, I start to look at is the reasons for the contacts and the topics that we're discussing, the reasons we're giving AVN. So we'll dig deep into that. I think I'm ready to go to the next slide. Thanks, Dustin. So when you look at this is a quarter side-by-side comparison. So the fourth quarter of 2021 and the first quarter of 2022, and you can see an increase. And one of the things when I dug down into the data that produces these numbers, I'm looking at cannabis had a 78% in education in the first quarter, and a lot of that was in March. And we have a fully staffed compliance consultant team. We have officers in the field doing work and being really responsive to the fear across our cannabis industry. So this is really what we would expect to see. These are really good, solid numbers, a data reflection of the work we're doing out there. Next slide. If we look at the number of contacts that we're having across the industries, this is just a breakdown, and you can see that there's over 4,000 in the liquor industry for education, 2,000 in the cannabis industry, and then 643. If we are to focus in on cannabis again, looking at 2021 in the dark column, that is for 44.3% of the number of contacts we made in 2021, which is again really positive. And again, it's in a more post-COVID time, but we were pretty opened up in 2021. So it's encouraging to see these numbers early on in 2022. Next slide. When we look at the month-to-month glance at licensee educational contacts, you can just see that March was a much busier, more proactive month in the area of education as we just continue to get out there and have contact with our licensees. And also we're doing lots of hiring, so lots of training during this month too. Next slide. When we focus in specifically on March's education topics, the top is at the bottom on this, so that's an adjustment I will make. But when we specifically look at March's education topics, you'll see that the regulatory issues are the top topic, and then we move right into public safety and youth access. So there's a great things for us to be educating about. Moving over to the right side of the slide, you'll see in liquor and cannabis. When we break this down by industry, in liquor and cannabis, regulatory remains number one, and then the light blue column in tobacco and vapor, which is tobacco education, is number one in that industry. So obviously I'm going to be doing some more look at what makes up tobacco education as we move forward. When we look at the violation breakdown for year-to-date 2022, what you're seeing is that we have liquor, tobacco vapor, and then cannabis. And the AVNs are in the royal blue, the warnings are black, and I added the NTCs over in cannabis. So for the year 2022, that's the number of total violations. And what I wanted to do, and you'll see this on the coming slides, is take a closer look at the reason for these types of contacts, the AVNs, and just to see if public safety really shows up as a top priority for us in how we're doing our business. A real quick glance at notice to corrects for the cannabis industries for March specifically, you can see the reasons for our contacts are pretty administrative in nature, which is what we would expect. Next slide. When we start looking at AVNs for the month of March, I'm really proud of this work. I'm really happy to see this as we dig a little bit deeper. The top priority, again, down there at the bottom, we're going to flip that around for next time. Those are all youth access issues. These are all selling product to persons under the age of 21. And then coming there and at the end is service to obviously intoxicated person. As we jump over to the right side, you can see that youth access remains for the month of March, top for liquor, top for cannabis, and top for tobacco. So, and also you can see the numbers of AVNs here that were issued in each industry, if that's of interest to you. 48 for liquor, 3 for cannabis, and then 18 for vapor.
So on youth access, top for cannabis, but we had at least one quarter or month, well, I guess it was 1 month that you reported to us where cannabis was at 100% compliance with our compliance checks.
Yep, and we'll see that breakdown. Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We'll definitely get there. And then warning topics, I think I got off by a slide. Sorry, I did notes ahead of time because these are new for me too. The warning topics for March, just to further break it down, you can see a lot of COVID-19 related stuff here. And there's a big combination of things so that you can see that this is a tool that our officers are using across the industries and across the spectrum of violations to just help people find compliance. Next slide. Alternative dispute resolutions. On the left, you see liquor. On the right, you see cannabis. And this is really just just a demonstration of our attempts to resolve these things at the lowest level possible, and again, help folks get in compliance. So really briefly, on the liquor side, we had 41 of these uncontested. That's common in the youth access because that's a licensee saying, yeah, sorry, and just moving forward. And then informal resolution, 25 of them, and 2 went to a formal hearing. On the right side in the cannabis industry, we had 2 at informal hearing. Next slide. So youth access compliance rate for liquor. You can see that we're at 81% for March, holding pretty solid about there. The average over the last 6 months is 79.2. Pre-COVID, it was 85%. So just an interesting note that we're not quite back there yet. And it's not looking like we're headed there, but we're doing lots of work. I think some of that's related to our delivery curbside stuff. Next slide. So as we begin to take a look at this, again, this is new for us, new for the industry. This is a learning process for everyone. You can see that we were at 70% for the month of March, but lots of jumping around. And so I was curious, and we broke this down a little bit more. And when we look at curbside compliance rate, it's actually 75%, which makes sense because there we have the licensee actually delivering curbside right there at the licensee location. And then when we get into delivery, that's a 57% compliance rate. So that's where the issue really starts to show up in their compliance. Next slide. Cannabis compliance. You can see that in the month of March, we were at 86% post-COVID, or the last 6 months, we're at 92.75%. And then our pre-COVID rate was 97%. Just a reminder there, though, that when we're dealing with this small of numbers, like 21 checks, little things make big differences. So that's why this looks to be such a large jump. Next slide, when we look at tobacco and vapor, I understand this has been one that always jumps around historically. It came out at 88% in March, an average over the last 6 months of 72.7%. I would also say that we've been doing a lot of our sign-our checks the FDA team has, so that probably has an impact behind the scenes on this, although I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I'll figure it out. Next slide, premise checks is really just about numbers. It's about showing how much we are out there. You can see that here we were at 3,771 locations in the month of March. I added on the right side a percentage of our total locations or total licensees that we visited for a frame of reference. Next slide. ID checks is another tool we have in addition to compliance checks to make sure that we're impacting youth access as much as we possibly can. So this is simply the number of ID checks we've done in the last 3 months. Next slide. We had a successful transition of the examiner team to the enforcement and education division. And so we're beginning to look at their data and the work they're doing, and we're starting to adjust some of their duties and really fold them into our division. And it's really exciting. And they're still largely driven by CCRS. So we're looking forward to having that transition technically complete so we can really fully make that work for us. Next slide. FDA, this is a new report for you too. We have a team that does not reflect in our other data. And so in addition to the data that I've reported here, we have about 900 further tobacco, mostly tobacco, a little bit of vapor inspections in first quarter. And then you can see an additional 742 undercover buy attempts, 171 referrals for sales to a minor with a 77% compliance rate. I also believe in being really transparent when it comes to how we do our business and how we police ourselves. And so this is a look at the last 3 years, year to date, for investigations, complaints, and how those were resolved. The third column is complaints, how they were resolved, and number of them that resulted in investigations. And then over on the right side is specifics about how those came in and how they were resolved. So as you can see in 2022, we've had 2 complaints about officer conduct, one of which was founded, one of which was unfounded, and the one that was founded was resolved in formal counseling and some training. Next slide is a report on hiring, training, and our vacancies. We still have 25 vacancies, although in March we did hire 10 individuals and we have 10 currently in background. We've done a ton of work on recruiting. As some of you know, we have a great new recruitment video out there that we'll be releasing soon. And then I know that I've used a lot of time, so I'm rushing, but we've done a lot of training to make sure we're staying current, informed, and educated in the industries that we regulate. And then I'll share this. I'll let you read it for yourself when you have time, but we're doing a ton of work in partnerships. I went on 4 field visits, including a visit to the incinerator for destruction, which we do occasionally, which was exciting. We held a leadership conference where we really sat down and did some training as we re-enter this post-COVID era, what we want that to look like. And oh, we held an in-person event to honor a retiree and swear in new officers. And I heard a rumor that used to happen at board meetings. And so at any point the board wants to have a conversation about re-engaging with that process for our staff. It's very meaningful to us, and I know to you. And so we're ready to do that when you are. And that's all. Sorry. Time for questions.
No, sorry, that's great. I didn't know we used to do that. It was before my time, but we should get back to it. You bet.
That leads to a question. So being that the board meetings are virtual, because David, what used to happen, they used to come into the board meeting and the swearing in and everything would take place with the chief of enforcement and giving them their badge and on and on. How would we structure that? Something to think about if to go back to it in the virtual setting. Would you bring them in and have it being done virtual or what?
We could certainly talk about what our options are. I think it's important. It's really important to us traditionally, and to honor the process that I present the badge for a swearing in. So I would need to be with the person, but whether that was on camera for you guys or they were able to introduce themselves, however we would decide that worked for us now.
Yeah, let's have that conversation soon. There's no reason not to. And at some point, we may have hybrid meetings where there are some people in person anyhow. So yeah, let's figure it out. That'd be great.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't believe I'm saying that, but it could be that during the time we're doing that, that might be the time that all board members are there.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with getting it out. All board members are there in person.
Hey, it's easy for me.
But yes, I think that's important.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Director. Appreciate it. Okay, we will turn to policy update from Justin Nordhorn. He's the Director of Policy and External Affairs. And Justin, is this the first time now officially you've been part of this? But I know anyhow, if anybody wonders, policy is going to be a regular part of VMT meetings, and Justin, who leads that team and our former enforcement chief, is the boss there. So welcome.
Thanks, Chair Postman, Member Garrett. So a couple things I'd like to start off with, just to kind of capture what was said already. I'd like to commend Chandra yesterday shared with the management team the video for recruiting, and that's really impressive. So hopefully you'll get a chance to see that. Wanted to give a couple shout outs to some folks. We've seen, so our group is fairly small. They do a fantastic job. Couldn't be more proud of the rules team that we have, and Mary doing the education and outreach with public health and prevention. But everybody has access to the rules inbox, and we've had some folks out of licensing that have really gone above and beyond in responding to questions that actually go to other agencies, and they've done the legwork. So we shared that internally with their management, but just to kind of highlight some of that. And then on the enforcement side, we've been working and collaborating with their training. And so I know that it's kind of a shame to have to highlight it, but usually when we've communicated stuff out, it goes out publicly to everybody. And so staff internally oftentimes gets the same information at the same time. And we're really trying to make an effort to get information out sooner. So Chandra's team reached out to me, and we collaborated, and we've got some good information out before the public announcements have gone out, so that we can have consistency and also confidence in answering questions as they come off from all over the state. So really nice job from the teamwork there. As we're getting into, I won't go into all of the different rules. You've heard those updates. So, of course, we've got the social equity, electronic services, axe throwing, pesticide action levels, et cetera. We have been doing some other outreach to be able to facilitate some of the issues in the interim session. So just to touch base, Mary's been working with other agencies on the healthy use survey that's going to be coming out in 23 for the 2023 healthy use survey. And so they've been navigating different and varying questions, and a lot of, obviously with COVID, things came up on how use is done. And so we want to make sure we're considering a number of those issues. I've also done some outreach with the new program manager, Department of Health, around medical cannabis. And we've been opening conversations on a variety of topics, including medically compliant product, availability of such in the stores. Is there any way we can collaborate together? And also on information that bud tenders can share. And it sounds like similarly with some of the robbery issues that we've had, there seems to be some assumptions on what can or can't be done. And so I think that there's certainly an opportunity for education. And so we'll be working with Department of Health to figure out how we can communicate that out for folks. The other thing that we have, we've got a number of outreach meetings coming up in the next couple weeks, trying to reach out to stakeholders in both the cannabis and the alcohol industry, seeking what they would like to see in the outreach program, and also how to set up some more informal problem solving. So it wouldn't be decision-making meetings, but really listening opportunities. And this is different than a listen and learn. This is more, educate us, let us take your concerns and challenges and barriers back so we can put those into consideration when we're going through policy development. And so we're really at the infancy stages of that right now, but that's something that's on the forefront. So on the rules side, we have three concurrent topics kind of going on in the interim here. We've got the THC compound issue that's continuing from last session. We also have issues around the definitions because we're taking the approach with the Delta 8 issues in the convenience stores and other licensed locations. So we've got that component there, and we're going to build some definitions in that. So you're going to see a number of different projects that are evolving in that particular area. As part of that, of course, we're also going to be looking at what do we need to do for legislative session next year. And so we've already started looking at that work. So we hope to have a number of those rules done by the year's end. And so we'll have a really good foundational piece for the legislative session. And as we're coming into later this month, we're hosting our first deliberative dialogue. Well, I shouldn't say our first, it's our third on the topic. So we're reconvening our panel of scientists to have on April 27th from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. We're going to have another deliberative dialogue session to talk about plant chemistry. And then we're also going to be having a couple more deliberative dialogues in May and June around the similar topics. And so we're going to be looking at a number of different issues and seeing what's important for folks to be engaging with, so we can have a good understanding and how we're going to develop those policies around the rules, as well as any type of agency request legislation that we want to propose to you all. And so then in July, we're also scheduled to have a couple more listen and learn sessions around our rules. So you can expect to see some rule language before then, and then we'll be engaging stakeholders in that particular outreach effort. And then the last thing that I wanted to kind of cover with everybody is the House Bill 1480 research project that we have going on. So the CDM group is the group that is doing that independent research. We've been having a really good working relationship with them. They've been sharing information. We're able to provide feedback. They're adopting that as they go through those processes. In the month of March, they were doing weekly updates to us because of the nature of the work they were doing in creating some interview questions for the focus groups and those types of things. And we're going to be shifting back into the monthly updates from them as we move forward. But basically what we have, they've done a lot of data collection. They've been focused on predominantly the free data sources initially that they can get data from. They're also looking at cost issues when it comes to purchasing data, and they're really keeping us informed about, if we're going to buy this, what does this mean on other parts of the study? So that's been very helpful to have. They've also provided a Twitter announcement in March based on the Alcohol Awareness Month. So that was a nice, thing that they did, not at our request. And right now they're focused on a moderating guide and focus group questions to do the outreach for industry members on some of the impacts around 1480. And what that's going to look like is they're going to have a cross section of both geographic and demographic, so they can make sure that we're having good coverage across the state and in all communities, as well as the first tier of candidates that they're looking at. We're not picking anybody who they're interviewing. We said, here's the list of all the licensees impacted. We want this to be neutral and independent. So they're going to be picking those and doing their recruitment on those. And my understanding is their first tier of folks that they're reaching out to are all people who have not provided previous comments. So, we have those previous comments that they can reference and refer to in the study. And so they're really looking for, some of those new voices that haven't been heard yet. And I thought that was pretty exciting for us. So the final report is going to be due November 1st. We'll have kind of the interim rough draft report in October 1st. And then we also have on the back end a dashboard that they're going to be creating for us. And so we'll be able to have some of the data and information set up. So the final report, what you can expect to see is an executive summary, in-depth analysis on the information that was gathered, and also trying to make it reader friendly by building in some infographics and the like. So hopefully it won't be just pages upon pages of text for everybody to go through. So that's kind of what we have going on at the moment, and we'll keep everybody informed. But I didn't want to rehash everything that you've heard this morning and yesterday in caucus. So those are the other items on our list.
You got plenty going on, as always. Appreciate it. I was just going to say on 1480, just in case anybody, that's the bill out of the legislature, the session before the most recent, that extended some of the allowances, and they mandated a study to see what impacts there were on that, both from the industry's positive perspective and others' concerns about it. Just so everyone knows what we're doing there. Yeah.
Yeah, and to call out this attaboy, I guess you could call it, to Chandra's group again. They shared yesterday what they presented to you today with the breakout between the delivery and the curbside. And I think that data breaking out is going to be really helpful for the CDM group to look at as an ongoing issue, because that directly relates to the alcohol allowances that were part of that bill. So really, really glad to see those pieces kind of moving in for those studies.
Yep, can't beat data. That's great. Okay, good. Thank you for the report. Appreciate it. Yep, see you next time. Move to communications with Communications Director Brian Smith.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman, Board Member Garrett. I'll be really brief. What I wanted to connect with is the communications team, all the things that you've heard going on in this meeting, we've been involved in some shape or form, as you might understand. So I won't go into any of the details there, but I'll just hit some of the media highlights and some of the insights maybe that you didn't hear today on some of those things. Since we met last, there's been a definite uptick in media contacts, particularly around the area of retail robberies. Not only our reaction to it and helping understand with the media about what's going on, but also some of the work that we initiated, through the roundtable that the board led with was very successful with so many people that you heard Rick talk about. So that's an ongoing issue that we continue to be asked about, and any number of issues ranging from the synthetically derived cannabinoids is still out there in those questions. Helping some of the media now, they're trying to catch up and understand the issue. I think a little bit more. It's complex for a lot of people now that they're trying to dig a little deeper. I was contacted today about our social equity program and where that's headed. I expect to get more of that over time. We're 10 years since the passage of I-502. That was just the vote. A whole lot of action happened before we started doing retail sales. But some are taking a look at that as it's been 10 years. And then Chair Postman was recently on the Inside Olympia program with Austin Jenkins. That's online now, and you can is available to watch if you missed it when he was on there. Of course, did a great job. And the Seattle Times just this week did a pretty full coverage of the Healthy Youth Survey, more so than I can really remember them digging into that. They didn't talk to us about it, but they did talk about youth with alcohol and the downward trend, the continued downward trends of alcohol use, and the COVID impact of youth cannabis use or reported use. So if you haven't seen that, of course, that affects us and the work that Mary does, of course, always. So again, fair amount of media contact this last month. I haven't run up the totals, but we're averaging at least 2 or 3 per day coming in on these things. So just moving in onto some of the other issues, I specifically am working with DFI on messaging around alternatives to cash. You heard Jim talk about that. You heard Rick talk about that on their website. I just heard during this meeting from their communications director that they've updated their website, wanted me to take a look at it. And from there, I can be able to put together a message from both DFI and from the LCB that can go out to licensees this week, explaining those cashless options that are available. And that's something that we've been hearing of late, is that there are some folks that are using these. It's working for some people, but not everyone is aware of them. And there are private businesses that can help these businesses do it. And we want to be able to help facilitate the communication, I guess, that they're there.
That's great.
Some of the other things, on social equity, we did our second video. Before I jump into that, Ollie, you got a question on it?
Yeah, the people that offer the cashless, whatever that is, you would think they would be the ones contacting all of the retailers with their product.
That's typically how a business would get their word out. Yes,
Right.
I don't know how much that they are doing that, but at least we can be a clearinghouse to let these businesses know that that's there. And of course, as in anything, we're all marketed to, right? And these businesses are in that field. So I can't vouch for how much they're reaching out to other licensees, but at least we can do a part two.
But I
But
think
it leads me to think and I'm thinking it from a business sense, that is something that they would be doing. So with an assumption that they are doing that and have done that, is there something we are not aware of that would stop someone from engaging into that type of system? Or
In the
whatever?
conversations that I've had internally, that has not come up. For example, Jim's got his hand up, and maybe I can let him explain that, but that we have not run into an obstacle that I'm aware of. I'll
Okay.
call on you, Jim. Do you mind answering Ollie's question?
Yeah. So these businesses definitely are reaching out to licensees to try to sell their services. But the feedback I've gotten from some of them is that it's not universally known. They get pushback from these licensees because they're not sure that it's okay for them to do that in some cases.
Okay,
So
okay.
that's part of what we want to get past is at least make them aware that that these systems are okay by us.
That makes sense.
And
Yeah.
and we heard that in almost each of these meetings in one place, and that's on us, that's for us to do. So I think that
Right.
at the marketing, we also know that some of the retailers have been reluctant to sign up because of the cost per transaction. We heard that in the roundtable. And so, there could have been slow in uptake for that reason too. So as we were saying before, it's just going to take all these things, DFI and Brian's people and everybody else, and answering those questions, I think.
Hearing it from a number of channels and hearing it repeatedly. I mean, it's the similar to type of things about questions about whether they can have firearms in the business. I mean, it was just, it's lack of clarity. And so when that lack of clarity exists, there's a hesitancy to act on it, right? And so we're trying to do our part.
Yeah, good.
So on the social equity side of things, we're very involved there. You heard Becky, of course, go deep into that. We'll be meeting tomorrow with Dr. Johnson at the Office of Equity to talk about our licensing plan and our communication plan for how we're going to go roll this out. Jim Weatherly, our DEI manager, will be present with us and helping us follow through to make sure that we're as most effective as we can on that. We have contracted with a translation firm that's been translating the social equity things that we do into Spanish. Now that the board took action today on the cannabis rules at the start of the stuff, for the proposed rules, we can get those translated and posted to our website alongside all of the other things that we do. Last week we launched our second in a video series. This one on steps you can take now to prepare for a social equity license. Made that available on our social equity section of our website. So those people that like to visually just watch something and have it. It's a quick little 3-minute video going through, reiterating some of the things that we have on our website about stuff you can do now. And that is ongoing. We're committed to the social equity stuff. I personally will be the lead from the communications team on the social equity all the way through. And we want to keep our information as current and as fresh and as valuable as we can throughout the process. So as you guys hear things or you want to talk to me about it, I hope you reach out and help us be able to augment that site to make sure it's something that we can be proud of and is valuable to people primarily. And then just some things we roll out quarterly. We do the newsletters, and we've launched the cannabis and the alcohol newsletters over the last 2 weeks, just so that you know. And we led off both of those with the profile of the new board member that'll be coming on in May, Mr. Vollendroff. And so that's just another channel of reaching licensees so that they're aware of what's going on with the board and the changes and what he will be bringing to the board beginning in May. And then ongoing things that I'm on the steering committee of both of the projects, CCRS and SMP, and that's always just ongoing kind of behind the scenes kind of work. Julie Graham is the lead on SMP for communications and is fully engaged and immersed on that. And as we take off, she'll be the lead, going forward and being able to carry that out. So I'm the lead on CCRS stuff, but that's about it in a nutshell. I mean, you've heard so much today and good information. Just know that we're involved in that and committed to all the updates that you heard from people today and trying to be successful there.
Great, good. Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Tony Hood, our Deputy Director, will join us for a general agency update on some of those things. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair Postman and Member Garrett. I will be brief today, but yesterday we started kicking off our discussion of Executive Order 2204, which is the order from the governor implementing the Washington State Pro-Equity Anti-Racism, or PAIR, plan and playbook. And in the executive order, it outlines what he expects from the Office of Equity, and it also outlines what he expects from the individual agencies. And one of the tasks that we are tasked with is to develop a PAIR team. And that PAIR team is going to be led by Jim Weatherly, our DEI manager. It will include at least one member of the executive management team, staff members, as well as external stakeholders. So we're very excited about the opportunity to include some external stakeholders. And we need to, at the very least, give the Office of Equity our contact name, which would be Jim Weatherly in this case. And we will have an outline, if not a fully developed team roster, by the end of the month. And that team will report back to the executive leadership of LCB, and they will help us try to implement all of the PAIR plan and the playbook. So the playbook will help us quite a bit when we get that. We haven't gotten it yet, but it contains a lot of templates and other guidance so that we can report back on our activities to the Office of Equity, and so that they get consistent reporting from all agencies. So we are excited about building that team and moving on to play our part in that plan. The only other item that I have today on my list is just the regular update on systems modernization project. We hired our organizational change management firm, and we are doing their contract this week. They will start on Monday. We're really excited to have Libram on board to help us with organizational change management. We will also be ready to publish our RFP. Our goal is next Thursday. We were very happy with the reviewers' comments. We had several reviewers of the RFP give us feedback, and the good news was the comments were very few, and we were able to address those comments very quickly. And we got high praise from our quality assurance, third-party quality assurance consultants, which was really great to hear. And we also had a good meeting with OCIO regarding our progress in meeting all the conditions so that we can move towards getting the first gate funding. The gate opened, I'm not sure what the technical term is, but that we get the first amount of money for our project. So I want to give kudos to our team, which is made up of people from across the agency, which have really done a great job on the RFP and the readiness of this project. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tony. Rick, I know we cherry picked a little of your report for earlier, but if you have any additional director's comments.
Just a couple things, thank you. In the discussion about DEI, I thought one of the things, and I talked with Jim, Tony and I and Anita, our HR director, meet with him regularly. And we met today, and I thought what would make sense is, given the agency priority that we have with respect to DEI, is to have Jim come to EMT and provide you information of the work that we're doing as an agency, just as we report the information that we're doing today by division. So I said I'll talk to the chair and our board member. I didn't do that beforehand, but I didn't suspect you'd have a problem with that. So
yeah, we're not going to say no.
So I thought I would give a great opportunity for our board members together to all hear the work that we're doing, because I know from time to time Jim has the opportunity to meet with you to introduce himself in the program, but to give you highlights each month of the work that we're doing, because it really is integrated throughout the agency. I just wanted to suggest that we begin that next month.
Yeah, I think we'd welcome the opportunity. Yeah.
And then, you know, I think it was Brian, if you have the opportunity to see the Seattle Times story on the health use survey, as you know, that's done in our schools every 2 years. I think it's well over 200,000 kids. That is some really interesting information. I think Mary would want to share with us. Almost a 50% drop in drug use through the year that was compared. Yet, you know, you see in that same article, overdose deaths among youth skyrocketing. So it's the most bizarre thing that I've seen over the years.
Some of it was surprising, and talking about Mary Sugar, our public health person who's worked on that project on off for a very long time and does such great work on that. And she was briefing me on this a bit ago. And the best explanation, it seems, for the decline in drug use is that with parents working from home, children didn't have the opportunity to smoke pot at home when their parents were home. And so I get that. But then you look at those other things that you mentioned, Rick, and it is really interesting. And of course, the pandemic was, it did not hit people proportionately. So some of that depends on where you live and what the, you know, is it a two-person working household, or do they work from home, or do they not, or is it a safe household? And so I will be interested to fast forward and see what the next survey shows on that. But yeah, some really interesting findings.
And I did share
discussions. In some of the discussions here that I have been having with the mayor's office and things, is how some of that go hand in hand with a lot of what's come out during COVID is mental illness type things with young folks, and things that young people have mentally been going through or experiencing, where they've never, you know, you didn't know that they were feeling the way they're feeling, and on, how some of that is all going hand in hand. Because as you know, when you read the paper, there are a lot of young folks that, for reasoning that the parents didn't have a clue or anything, they are committing suicide. And it's something there associated with, I don't think it's drug use, it's just undetected. I'm not trying to diagnose or anything, but there's a lot of undetected mental illness that folks don't recognize, and even the people that's experiencing it, they don't recognize what they're experiencing and how it associate with something else.
Yep.
Yeah.
It might be good to have Mary come and, you may not be aware, we're one of the few agencies that's part of putting those questions together for the Healthy Use Survey. We've been doing that, well, long before Mary came the first time. And so we do have an influence in the questions that are chosen or not. And so it might be good because Mary has a lot of background and experience with that to share that information, because I was kind of blown away by yet almost a 50% drop in drug use among youth, which we've never seen. We've never seen a fall like that before, and yet surging suicides and overdoses related to youth. So it's baffling, and it'll be interesting in the article to see, I think you said, David, what we see next year.
Yeah.
Supposedly a year after we've come out of, almost a year out of COVID, because they're back in the schools. They'll be taking the survey again in the fall, winter, I believe. And I don't know if that's another year out, but anyway, I just thought I would share that. I said enough about all the good work that the board and the agency is doing around the surge in armed robberies, and we'll be sharing more information, as Brian said, in the coming week. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, that brings us pretty much to the end. I'll just make a last call here for any director who has anything to add or that we forgot. And while we look for a hand, I don't see any. Member Garrett, any final thoughts or questions? Nor from me. So with that, we will adjourn the executive management team meeting for April 13th, 2022. And we'll see you next week for board caucus. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to the team.
Thank you.